Today's program has been organized by FIDH and the Sombath Initiative to mark 1,000 days since the disappearance of Laos civil society leader Sombath Somphone. As most of you know, Sombath disappeared at a police checkpoint on a busy street of the Lao capital city, Vientiane, on 15 December 2012. We thought it was important to be here today because no matter how many days have passed since Sombath's disappearance, the passage of time will not make the case of Sombath disappeared. The case of Sombath and all other cases of enforced disappearances in Laos, in the region and beyond. Our organizations, the organizations represented here today, as well as other organizations in the region and beyond, activists and organizations, will continue to campaign and to work to seek truth and justice for all victims of enforced disappearances, including Sombath Somphone. Four excellent panelists are with us here today to navigate, help us navigate through the personal, the legal, the political dimensions of Sombath Somphone's disappearance. They are from closer to the screen, Kingsley Abbott, who's the International Legal Advisor for Southeast Asia for the International Commission of Jurists, ICJ. Next to him, Shui Meng Ng, who's the wife of Sombath Somphone and also a member of the advisory board of the Sombath Initiative. Then we have Ankana Nilapayjit, who is the founder and president of the Justice for Peace Foundation, also a member of the advisory board of the Sombath Initiative, and a nominee to the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand. Closer to me, Debbie Stothard, who is the coordinator of ALTSEAN Burma, a Bangkok-based organization working on Burma, Myanmar, also the FIDH Secretary General, and the co-chair of the Media Committee of the ASEAN People's Forum, ASEAN Civil Society Conference. Before we hear from our speakers, I will give you just a little bit of context about enforced disappearances in Southeast Asia and in Laos. Between 1980 and 2014, the UN Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances, also known as WGEID, which is the UN body that was primarily set up to assist families of disappeared persons to determine their fate or whereabouts, received 1,065 cases from 8 out of the current 10 ASEAN member states. The only two countries that did not report any cases of enforced disappearances were Brunei and Singapore. Out of those 1,065 reported cases, 875 cases have never been resolved. This is an 82% of cases that have never been resolved. And on top of the list, we have the Philippines with 625 cases, followed by Indonesia with 163, and Thailand with 81. At the bottom we have Laos and Myanmar with 2 cases, and Vietnam and Cambodia with 1 case each. However, it is estimated that the number of enforced disappearances in the region is much higher. And this is valid for Laos too. Now, the working group, as I said, the UN working group counts 2 cases of enforced disappearances in Laos, and one is the case, obviously, of Sombath Somphone. But independent research determined that there are at least 13 cases of enforced disappearances that have never been adequately investigated, and for which the fate or whereabouts of the victims have never been determined. It has to be said that even some people think that this figure of 13 cases is a conservative figures. There are some estimates that bring that figures up to 20, even 30 cases of enforced disappearances. Interestingly, 9 of those 13 cases happened after September 2008, including the case of Sombath. And why am I bringing up this date? This date is important because 7 years ago this month, Laos signed the International Convention for the Protection of All People from Enforced Disappearances, or ICPPED. And I think Kingsley will expand a little bit on in terms of the legal obligations that come with the signature of this convention. Now, just to conclude, what has been the Lao government positions with regard to the enforced disappearances? I think we will hear from Shui Meng her direct experience of interacting with the Lao government on the case of Sombath. But if we can have an image, a picture of an idea, or an idea of what the Lao government position with regard to enforced disappearance, one way of doing this is to look at the recent Universal Periodic Review of Laos that took place in January this year. Universal Periodic Review, I think most of you are familiar with this term, is a peer review of the human rights record by UN member states that take place in Geneva every about 4 years, a little bit more than 4 years. So at the latest UPR, the government rejected all 8 recommendations that were made by other UN member states to investigate the enforced disappearance of, all cases of enforced disappearances. So for Laos, for the Lao government, there are no cases of enforced disappearances in the country. They say that all those allegations are not true, except for the case of Sombath. They do acknowledge that the case of Sombath has to be investigated. Sombath has disappeared, and so they do acknowledge this case. But then their position gets a bit more contradictory and inconsistent, because 10 countries recommended the government investigate the disappearance of Sombath, but the government accepted only 4 of those 10 recommendations. So I don't know if you managed to follow the logic, but it's quite interesting that even recommendations that read almost exactly the same, made by 2 different countries, one was rejected and one was accepted. Technically, it's not rejected. It was noted because there is no rejection of UPR recommendations. I think probably even this, maybe our panelists can expand a little bit on this. I think I will end it here. Just a couple of things, a couple of announcements. There are a bunch of publications, good ICJ reports on the case of Sombath Somphone on the desk near the front door, as well as a joint statement that 11 organizations have signed for the 1000 day of Sombath Somphone's disappearance, and you can pick up a copy on your way home. The other thing, feel free to take any photos of the event, share on social networks, and if you use Twitter, you can use the hashtag #WhereIsSombath. I don't know if you can see this, but maybe it's too small, but in any case, it's "Where is Sombath?", which has been the question that a lot of activists and civil society and ordinary people have been asking for almost 3 years all around the world, and also the slogan of the campaign to return Sombath safely to his family. So without further ado, I think I will turn it over to Kingsley, who has the skill of making international law and legal issues very interesting and very easy to understand. So Kingsley.
Thank you, Andrea. And good morning, everybody. I am both honored and saddened to be here today. Unfortunately and tragically for Shui Ming, there is really no news except for more commitments by Lao to investigate this case. But these commitments start to ring hollow the more that time passes. Now 1,000 days. And we're not any closer to knowing the truth about Sombath's whereabouts or his fate. As Andrea said, I've been asked to talk a little bit about enforced disappearance and some of the law that applies. Because based on what we know, there are reasonable grounds to believe that this case is one of enforced disappearance. And enforced disappearance is a very serious crime under international law. Enforced disappearance can actually violate several different human rights, such as the right to liberty, the right to security, the right to be free from arbitrary detention, the right to be free from torture, and so on. And these are all protected in treaties to which Laos is already a state party, including the Convention Against Torture and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, enforced disappearance is such a serious international crime that it has its own specific treaty, the Convention Against Enforced Disappearance. And as Andrea said, Laos has signed this treaty but hasn't yet ratified it, hasn't yet become a state party. But notwithstanding that they haven't yet ratified it, by signing, Laos already has a duty not to take any action contrary to the objective and purpose of that treaty. I would just like to highlight two important features of the Convention Against Enforced Disappearance. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the two elements of what the crime of enforced disappearance is made up of. Firstly, enforced disappearance is the deprivation of liberty of a person by the state, so arrest, detention, or their agents, followed by a refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of liberty or concealment of the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person. Now, the United Nations Working Group on Enforced Disappearance, which Andrea has referred to already, which monitors state compliance with this treaty, has said that enforced disappearance is a heinous violation of human rights and an international crime. And I'll explore a little bit why that is. First of all, it is a crime that has a doubly paralyzing effect on victims who are frequently being detained, living in fear for their lives, and on their families and loved ones who are living in constant fear, their emotions ranging between hope and despair, unable to really move on with their lives until the issue is resolved. And lastly, the case also has a devastating impact on communities and society more generally, because communities and societies can become fearful when an enforced disappearance has occurred in their midst. And I think some of the other speakers may wish to talk a little bit more about that later. Because I think Laos is a classic example of a country where society and the communities within Laos have been affected by this crime. And two other features of enforced disappearance I think are important to note. First of all, no circumstances whatsoever, not even war or some kind of public emergency, ever justify enforced disappearance. And secondly, and this is important, enforced disappearance is a continuous crime. And I know that sounds legal and technical, but it's quite easy. What it means is the act of enforced disappearance, the crime of enforced disappearance, begins at the time of the abduction and extends all the way until either the state acknowledges the detention or releases information about the fate or whereabouts of the individual. And so this is not a case that an enforced disappearance is likely to have taken place in December 2012. Enforced disappearance in this case is taking place even today. So what are Laos' legal obligations? Because that's an important starting point. What is Laos obligated to do in this case? And it's obligated to do a number of things. And I'll highlight two important obligations. Firstly, Laos, under the Convention Against Enforced Disappearance and the treaties to which it is already a state party, is already obligated to inform Shui Meng, as a victim of enforced disappearance herself, and Sombath's family of the progress and results of the investigation. And Shui Meng may wish to talk a little bit about that, but I can say with some confidence that has not happened. It certainly has not happened for a long time. Secondly, Laos has a clear obligation to carry out a prompt, impartial, and effective investigation into Sombath's disappearance. And I'd like to emphasize again that these aren't mere suggestions or nice things that Laos might consider doing in this case. These are Laos' international legal obligations, not imposed on them, but obligations which Laos itself has taken on as obligations itself. Regarding the second obligation I described, the duty to investigate, I would like to explore a little bit that in more detail, because that is a large part of what we are all calling on Laos to do primarily, to effectively investigate this case. First, in many crimes, and particularly in cases of enforced disappearance by definition, it's quite common that there is very little or no evidence of the abduction taking place, which often makes it quite easy for a state to deny any sort of leads, information, knowledge, or involvement in the crime. Now, what is unique with this case, as I'm sure some of you are already aware, some of you may not be aware, is that Sombath's abduction on 15 December 2012 was captured, very unusually, on closed-circuit television. And I just thought I would play a little bit of that to you now, so that if you haven't seen it before, you will see the very moment that we are talking about. And I should add, this video was taken on a camera by somebody who was looking at a monitor where the video was playing by the police shortly after the abduction. So it isn't the original footage itself, it's a video of the footage. Now, I'll start by saying here we are on a street in Vientiane, and what the camera is looking at is a police checkpoint. And there's no dispute about that. The Lao authorities have said that yes, this was a police checkpoint, and indeed Even today, it is still a police checkpoint on the side of the road. And there's a little booth off to the left. The vehicle you see on the left, parked on the side of the road with the lights on in the front, is Sombath's truck. And I believe he was an enthusiast, and this is one of those old vintage American military jeeps. He's stopped here at the checkpoint, and he's sitting inside the vehicle. And at some point you can see that he seems to be talking to someone standing outside of the vehicle, and you can see the person there. Sombath's talking to him through the window. Shui Ming saying it might be clearer on the television monitors, but over to you. Yeah. You'll see in about 30 seconds, Sombath actually gets out of his vehicle. There he is there, out of the vehicle and walking behind the truck. Some time passes, and in 20 seconds, you'll see a motorcycle arrive and park in front of Sombath's truck. And then, somewhat suspiciously, you'll see the rider of that motorcycle run towards where Sombath just entered at the checkpoint. Here's the motorcycle arriving with the light on. You can see the rider dismounting, and then he runs towards where Sombath walked. I'll fast forward a little bit. Because what we will see next is a man who isn't Sombath entering Sombath's truck and driving it away. You can see the man entering the truck now. And Sombath's truck is driven away. I'll fast forward another couple of minutes. And what we'll see next is a man standing on the side of the road who appears to be waiting for someone to arrive. And you can see the person there in a white shirt. We'll now see a SUV of some sort arriving with its hazard lights on and parking where Sombath's truck was parked. I think this is it arriving now, and you see it has its hazards on and it parks where that man was waiting. And you can see several men appear to enter the vehicle there. And I think there's a reasonable suspicion that one of those men is Sombath. You'll see then a motorcycle pulls out in front of the truck, and the truck follows it off camera. And that's the video of the abduction. So that video captures Sombath's abduction on the 15th of December 2012. Just a few days later, 4 days later, on the 19th of December, the Lao government made a statement in which they acknowledged that the CCTV footage showed Sombath being stopped at a police checkpoint in Vientiane. But by the following month, in January 2013, the police claimed it could no longer really verify that it was in fact Sombath in the footage, and that is a position it has held generally ever since. And Shui Ming may wish to comment on whether she believes that person is Sombath, whether she believes that vehicle is Sombath's vehicle. But the last statement, and this is extremely disappointing, the last statement from the Lao government, which provided any sort of specific detail about the status of the investigation, was in June 2013, which is more than 2 years ago. One of its most recent statements was in January 2015, earlier this year, during the Universal Periodic Review, which is a review of Laos human rights record, where Laos said, "The accusation the Lao government is involved can be refuted, and Lao is still seriously conducting the investigation." Just 3 months ago, in June 2015, during that same process, the review of Laos human rights record, it said that the Lao government confirms that the concerned authorities of Lao PDR are still thoroughly conducting the investigation and will continue to do so. In the hope of re-energizing this investigation, which now seems to be perpetually ongoing, in December 2014, the International Commission of Jurists released a report on this case, which was entitled Missed Opportunities, Recommendations for Investigating the Disappearance of Sombath. And copies of that report are available at the entrance. The co-author of that report is a senior British investigator, former counter-terrorism at Scotland Yard, and now the chief investigator at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. He reviewed the available material in this case, and crucially, he concluded that this case is still eminently solvable. And he went on to make 19 concrete, practical recommendations to the Lao government as to how to investigate this case. And I'll just list 3 of them. The first is to formulate a sensitive family liaison strategy with Shui Ming that ensures that she is kept informed of the progress of the investigation. The second was to submit the CCTV footage that we've just viewed to accredited and expert laboratories that could provide the best possibility of enhancement. And he also advised the Lao government to seek the assistance of appropriate agencies in other states who could assist with the forensic examination of crime scenes and vehicles and phone and CCTV footage. Before the Human Rights Council earlier this year, Lao at least said that it had read the report. However, it is not enough for Lao to simply say over and over again that it is ongoing, that there is an ongoing investigation and that it is continuing.